Hey everyone, Michael Unger here with another edition of Ask an Astronomer. And as always, I am joined by our astronomer just a couple doors down from me on unceded territory of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, and that is Marley. Hey Marley, how's it happening?
Was it happening? It's fine. Sorry.
Yeah, that's right. I said,
Yes.
how's it happening?
How's it happening? Okay. It's happening. I'm here, I guess. How is it happening for you, Michael?
It's almost dark. It is that time
Mm,
of year where we don't have the sun blasting in our the sides of our faces anymore. That was like that very
mm.
brief time. You can kind of look back at previous Ask an Astronomer episodes, and you can tell what time of year it is just by the shadows on our faces with the sun coming in. But we're getting closer and closer to winter solstice, the dark skies. I actually find the night sky during wintertime really crisp and clear. I think is that because of the colder air? Like, why is it that the winter skies seem to be so much crisper than the summertime?
Yeah, that's why it's colder. So the warm air, causes a lot of turbulence, is what I think is what it's called. And
Yeah.
so it makes for poor viewing. You also get more haze, from the city haze and city pollution and stuff like that in warmer temperature air. And so with cold air, it is actually sharper. Like it makes for better viewing.
Yeah, I was looking at the moon, like I think maybe 2 nights ago, and it was so bright. It was like, wow, it's blindingly how bright it is. So everyone out there, definitely get out and look up at the nighttime sky. Check out Orion, which of course is one of my favorite wintertime constellations. For this episode of Ask an Astronomer, though, we have got some big announcements that just sort of like slipped in there, and like, hey, we've got some pretty cool announcements to share with you folks about our favorite Canadian astronauts. So if you're out there watching on YouTube or Facebook and you want to get in on the conversation, and of course, you can ask any question you like under the universe. We will do our best to answer it. So, Marley, we have had several of the Canadian astronauts. Some have been here in person, some have joined us live here on this very show. So, it is very exciting to talk about our friends, right? Like, if we've talked to them once, then they're sort of our friends, right?
I guess so. I mean, I consider myself distant acquaintances with Joshua Kutcher. I would not call him a friend. But yeah, I've met him. He's very cool. He's very nice.
Well, I have a picture of both Jeremy Hansen and Joshua Kuchrik with their arm around me, so it's kind of like that seems pretty friendly to me.
That is very friendly that they put the arm around you. When I got a picture with Joshua, he just like stood there, like just default pose. And I was like, you've been doing this for a long time.
All right, so of course we are talking about Joshua Kuchrik, who has been in the news, as well as the other astronaut Jenny Gibbons. So what's going on with them?
On November, I think it was November 20th, the Canadian Space Agency was like, hey, by the way, we're going to make an astronaut assignment announcement on November 22nd. And I was like, oh, so little time to come up, to see that. So they announced, or maybe a little bit before the 20th, they announced that they were going to make an announcement, which is always very fun. And it came out during that announcement that Jenny Gibbons has been assigned as the backup astronaut for Jeremy Hansen on the Artemis 2 mission, meaning that she will take his spot if he's unable to go for any reason on Artemis 2. She will take his place. And that Joshua Kuchrik had been assigned to a 6-month mission on the International Space Station, launching on Starliner 1 no earlier than the beginning of 2025. So neither of these two have been to space yet. It looks like Joshua will now be going to the ISS, and Jenny has the potential to go to space and around the moon if for any reason Jeremy Hansen is unable to do so.
Right. Cool. So in two very different missions too, because the Artemis mission is kind of, this is our future. This is going to the moon. These next like huge steps, and of course something that no human has done for a very long time. And then also on Joshua Kuchrik's side, kind of the old guard, which is the International Space Station, and going back, but going back in a different way because he's going up on a different kind of vehicle that hasn't really been used that much, right?
No, it hasn't. And we talk about that a little later because I wanted to talk more about Jenny and like what exactly a backup astronaut does. Because we're
Okay.
more familiar with like the ISS mission. Like that's what all astronauts tend to do, as far as we know, is they go to the ISS, they do their experiments, they come home. But Jenny, as a backup astronaut, it's a slightly different thing that I think people are very much less familiar with the role of a backup astronaut. So really her role now is, a backup astronaut will replace a crew member if they're unable to take part in the mission, which is what kind of the whole point of backup, just in case. They
Mm-hmm.
receive the exact same training as the crew to an extent. They get the same type of training. In the training, that means that she will help define and develop procedures that are necessary for the mission. So she's kind of like a guinea pig in a way. Same with the other prime crew astronauts are also somewhat guinea pigs for future missions. She's a test subject, for critical operations from launch to splashdown to recovery. She helps define those procedures. She may end up serving as Capcom, as she's been trained in all the requirements. Like if you've seen Apollo 13, like the
Mm-hmm.
astronaut who might get measles is removed and then serves as Capcom for part of the mission.
Mm-hmm.
That might be her type of role. It's potentially a role she could have, given that she knows all of the mission objectives, and she is now prepared for future missions. So she may not necessarily go on Artemis 2, but she's already done a huge part of the training that could serve her very well for future Artemis missions. So it kind of gives her an advantage in terms of training scheduling for other future missions to the moon. And that training is very, very involved. She's being trained from beginning to end kind of the mission. And so she gets to learn how to fly the Orion and the Space Launch System, learning all of the different crew displays, the vehicle controls, all the way from launch to reentry, right? So the main the SLS is only there for launch, but the Orion capsule, you're in it the entire time. And so you have to know that system, ins and outs. So Jenny has already undergone basic astronaut training, but now this is now mission specific training.
Mm.
And so she'll be learning, pre-launch operations around the launch pad, the mobile launcher and emergency pad exit procedures. If something happens on the launch pad before launch and they need to get out and to safety, she will be trained in this along with the Artemis 2 prime crew. Major milestones leading up to and during launch, as well as the first few hours where you're in orbit before they head off to the moon. Abort scenarios. So if it's launch and the mission abort, how they, get out, through the Orion and the safety measures in place with that. And even flying to the moon, right? The high Earth like orbit vehicles, testing to better understand Orion's manual piloting qualities. Like, yes, a lot of it is, staggered and automated, but you still have to fly it. There is still a manual component that she will learn, and learning how to, reduce risks for future missions. When Orion docks with the Gateway, for example, she'll also help to be trained on. There's a lot that she, learns, and as well as the crew. A lot of them, get kind of scary to think about, like reentry and splashdown. So she will
Mm-hmm.
be trained in the overview of the entry timeline, because everything is, pretty much to the second or at least to the minute of what will happen when they come back. The steps you have to take before entry. The Orion capsule is unique in that its reentry is like a skip maneuver. So it hits the top of the atmosphere, kind of bounces off, and then hits it again, and then begins
Mm-hmm.
like the main entry, which is unique to this type of mission. We didn't used to do reentry in this way until the Artemis program. Learning the communications with recovery forces, right? Because they land in the water. And they have to find you and get to you, and different splashdown scenarios that could be faced as they wait to be recovered. Maybe you're
Right.
too far off the mark and now the boat takes a very long time to get to you.
Yeah.
She will learn all of these things.
And that's kind of interesting, as opposed to when I think with the Soyuz capsule that was landing, in the was it Siberia that it would land down in, or Kazakhstan? I think that it would land, and then there was different scenarios for if it got off course and if you were stuck somewhere that the recovery crew couldn't get to you. Didn't they have sort of like survival kits? Like they might have to like survive in like the outback, but in this case you're in the ocean, so you can't leave the capsule. Like if you splash down and it's going to take a long time to recover, you're just going to have to stay in the capsule until they get to you, right?
Yeah, they stay in there. Also, changing out of this like life jacket procedures, things like that. Like it's very, you have to know a lot to be able to survive just waiting, and establishing communications and being able to know where you are even is part of that training as well.
So they're training with the crew that's been announced. So that includes Jeremy Hansen and the other 3 American astronauts. So are they like one unit now, or are they kind of like now sort of like a separate unit, but just doing the same training?
So I think there'll be 2 separate units. They might train together initially, but as it gets closer and closer to mission launch, the backup crew kind of takes a step back, because now it's really, close to day of training that needs to happen and preparation that needs to happen. So the closer we get to launch day, the likelihood that the backup crew is needed drops down, right? Like between now and November 2024, anything could happen. So the backup crew is actively training. As it gets closer and closer to 2024, they start to taper off and the focus becomes on the prime crew. I haven't been able to find, I'm sure it was announced and maybe I just missed it, the backup crew for the American astronauts, because they would, that would be her team. But they kind of have to all know each other and work together because maybe only one isn't able to make it and she substitutes in. So there's an element of togetherness, but also an element of like her own cohort as well, especially as we get closer to mission go.
Right. Oh, so she's undergone some basic training. But what is the specific mission training that she's going to go under?
So a lot of it pertains to the Orion capsule itself. So understanding the Orion capsule is you have to figure out how to live on it for 10 days as a group of 4 in something that is about the size of a small camper van. It's like 8.5 cubic meters of space for you and 4 other people to survive in. There's one washroom, right? It's very much, it doesn't sound very pleasant, but you have to figure out, daily operations, right? How you're going to eat, exercise, life support systems, and other equipment. She has to be trained and learn, all of this. These are images from inside of the Orion capsule. The one on the left shows launch configuration. So these are their seats. Remember when they launch, they're not sitting up, they're like tilted back 90 degrees because the rocket moves up. So that's launch configuration. 2 of those seats will get stored. So they fold up, they store them. The other 2 are kept for the commander and the pilot. And as for sleeping, that's what the image on the right shows. You will be fastened to the walls of the spacecraft in a sleeping bag, not unlike the ISS. And they actually have a built-in 8-hour sleep period scheduled for them, right? You have to sleep for 8 hours. Like this is bedtime, which would make sense. Their days are going to be very, very busy and they would need adequate amount of sleep to be able to do it. But her training now will pertain to learning, the Orion flight systems, learning, adapting to life in this sort of environment for the next 10 days. Or for a mission length of 10 days and kind of learning everything there is to need to know. The life support systems, were tested with Artemis 1 and the first Orion capsule, but they haven't been tested with people yet. And so knowing the ins and outs and how they work and different problems that can arise will be part of her training as well.
When I was a kid, our family used to go down to Palm Springs and we had a minivan, a Ford Aerostar, and my dad would, he would like to, save some money on a hotel room by just, having us, sleep in the minivan on our way down, the whole family. I can imagine that's very, very similar to what the feelings are going to be like for these astronauts, except it's going to be much longer than just 1 or 2 days.
Yeah, and they also can't open a window. Like that is like I can't express how much like that is like you can't even open a window. Like that's terrible. Like everything else sounds stressful and but I could maybe manage it, but not being able to get fresh air feels like probably the worst part for me anyway. She'll also learn, emergencies. This is also what the prime crew will also be part of their training will include. So any medical emergencies that happen on board, again, you're in this tiny little area. What if someone hurts themselves? How do you deal with that? Also, you're on your way to the moon and it's not, after a certain point, how do you turn yourself around and get back? So learning medical emergencies, how to deal with them. Artemis 1 worked as a very big part in discovering different risks in terms of water survival, emergency evacuation, and communications problems. But there's always still an inherent risk to spaceflight, right? Especially when you add people into the mix, there's always more risks that come with it. So surviving in water when they return or during launch, if they have to abort the launch, safely evacuating. And also, if you have communications problems, you're in the Orion spacecraft, you're headed towards the moon, but you can't hear Earth anymore, or Earth can't hear you. There's some sort of communication problem. How do you continue the mission? What are the steps that need to be taken? And what does that look like is also something that the astronauts get trained in. And a whole lot of other stuff. So they also get trained in science experiments and geology training. And this is not specific to the Artemis 2 mission. This is where we see these astronauts kind of, trial running or testing methods for future Artemis missions. So the ones where we are on the surface of the moon. Prime astronauts, the prime crew, are helping to test those procedures. So are the backup crew and other astronauts. So, for example, David St. Jacques, all the way on the ISS, was trying out something called the biomonitor. It was new Canadian tech at the time. I think this photo is from like 2018.
Mhm.
And what it was like a tank top that recorded your vital signs. So blood pressure, breathing rate, blood oxygen, all that kind of stuff. Because one of the big things they want to measure is how much radiation these astronauts are going to be exposed to. What is their health like while they're on this journey? And so that's one way they participate in science in this way. What they do kind of outside of that is like field geology training is a big one for the Artemis program, especially because we anticipate going to the moon, taking samples and bringing them back. So the bottom image on the bottom left is an image of Jeremy Hansen and Jenny Gibbons and Dr. Gordon Osinski, who's like a very famous geologist. They took place in field geology training at Mistassin Lake in Labrador. It's part of a crater formed by a meteorite impact from millions of years ago. And so they get to practice geology in a meteorite impact crater, which is the most common landform we see on the moon. So it's the closest they can get to, exploring the moon without actually being on the moon. And they can learn and test different instruments and techniques needed for geology work. And that's what they do there. The photo on the right-hand side is Jeremy Hansen, Victor, and Reed. The other crew, two of the other three crew members, not pictured, is Christina Cook. They are looking at different lunar samples, right, from the Apollo missions. And so they get to kind of tour these facilities and do these field geology training trips to kind of anticipate steps astronauts will need to learn for those future Artemis missions. So they're always quite busy, and their training looks, very different. A lot of traveling and a lot of long days, I imagine.
Yeah, it's really interesting that these astronauts, even though they're not actually going to land on the moon, they're already kind of like preparing themselves. But then I guess like it's infrastructure for the training that happens for the next astronauts, right? It's a very kind of like interesting way to kind of like think about it.
No, it's always focusing for the next step, right? So yes, we need to train for what we're doing now, but also what about the next mission? And what about the mission after that? And we already have, a cohort of astronauts who have completed basic training, so might as well utilize them while they're waiting for a seat on another mission, while they're waiting another mission assignment, have them learn and trial run other things that we're looking towards in the future.
Very cool. Okay, so that's basically what Jenny Seide is going to be preparing for. But what about our friend Joshua Kutryk?
Joshua Kutryk will be going to the ISS via the Boeing CST-100 Starliner. Now, this is not something that the Starliner has been in and out of the news quite a bit. But basically for Joshua, what this mission will look like is he will be one of the crew members on the first operational mission for Starliner. So this is the first mission where it is actually going to go to the ISS with people. They will stay for 6 months. It'll bring people back, like the first official mission for the spacecraft. He will work as a mission specialist for Starliner and then become a flight engineer for the International Space Station. This mission makes him the 4th Canadian Space Agency astronaut on a long duration mission, which is, only the 4th. He has been involved with the Starliner team since 2021, so he's not unfamiliar with the spacecraft or the processes. He's been the team for a while, and he will be the Capcom for first flight with crew. So there's 2 different crewed missions that are happening. There's the crewed flight test that he will be Capcom for, and then there's the first operational mission, which he will be on the mission for. He'll be inside of the spacecraft. And while he's on the ISS, he'll do Canadian and international science experiments, tech demos, and will support, different operations and maintenance activities, typical astronaut stuff that they do on board, right? It's interesting, but the main interesting part is that he will be the first Canadian to fly as part of NASA's Commercial Crewed program, which utilizes the CST-100 Starliner. This is a spacecraft that was actually way back, I think it was like 2010 or so. NASA contracted out Boeing and SpaceX to develop, these vehicles that will shuttle people to and from the space station. You're most familiar with the Dragon capsule because that is the one that finished first, essentially. SpaceX's Dragon capsule. The other one is the Starliner that has not finished yet. It's been designed to be reused up to 10 times, and Boeing was going to build 2 of them for a total of 20 missions. It can carry a maximum of 7 astronauts or a combination of crew and cargo. NASA will only ever send 4 people. Will only have 4 people on board at a time. It has manual controls as a backup option, but uses an autonomous docking system, which is kind of cool. And this is different in the sense that it lands on the ground. So very similar to like the Soyuz, when they come back, they land on the ground as opposed to in the ocean. It has airbags to kind of cushion the fall. This has been delayed for forever. The Starliner, the first crewed flight test, so the mission that Jeremy's meant to be Capcom for, was supposed to happen in 2017. It did not go. Or 2018, sorry. February 2018 was supposed to be the initial launch for the crewed flight test. That has not happened. It was then rescheduled to August 2018. It did not happen at all. In a July 11th report from 2018 from the US Government Accountability Office, NASA themselves said that there was a 0% chance that it would be certified for routine ISS missions by 2019. So it was very, very delayed. It took Boeing a very long time to build the spacecraft because they can't just send people right away. They do an operational flight test first, the empty one. So very similar to the Artemis 1 mission, where we sent the empty Orion capsule up, it came back, it performed its mission. They did not have their first test flight, empty test flight, until December 20th, 2019, when it was supposed to happen about 2 years earlier. And it didn't work very well. It did quite...
What do you mean didn't work very well?
It launched, but it couldn't make it to the space station. So what was supposed to happen is it was supposed to launch, it was supposed to dock with the ISS, undock, come back after a period of days. It couldn't even make it to the ISS. The mission length was only 2 days long. It basically went up and then came right back down. It ran into a software issue. They later found out that had it not been corrected while the issue was happening, it would have crashed back into its own service module and destroyed the spacecraft. So it took a very long time for this to get into the air. Astronauts had already been selected for the mission. They all got shuffled to other missions. One of them was Nicole Mann, who became the first Native American astronaut in space, female astronaut in space on the Crew 5 mission. She was supposed to originally be on one of the flights for Starliner. So, and that happened in 2021 when she got reassigned. It's very much delayed with problems in engineering and building and delays. Boeing themselves decided to do a second flight test, which is good that they should have, because the first one wasn't entirely successful. That finally went, I think, in late 2022 is when that managed to go up. All this to say is, to date, Boeing has, so each time they delay themselves, each time there's a delay, NASA goes, we're not paying for that. We're not, you had a contract to fulfill, you're not fulfilling it. We're not gonna, so they have to do an expense against their earnings, right? Or a charge against their earnings. To date, Boeing has almost about $1 billion against their earnings with this one spacecraft.
Oh, goodness.
Which is just, but it's Boeing, so I feel like they're gonna be fine. Anyway, we finally now have a launch date for the first crewed flight test, right? This is supposed to happen April 14th, 2024. And that is the mission that Joshua will be the Capcom for. And on the flight will be, the crew has been released. The crew was actually released June 16th, 2022. Suni Williams and Butch Wilmore. Suni Williams was assigned to Starliner 1, the operational flight, and Wilmore had been a part of the crewed flight test since 2020. So Suni Williams got reassigned to the crew flight test as opposed to the operational flight. Originally, it was going to be Mike Finke and Nicole Mann. Mann was reassigned in 2021 to SpaceX Crew 5. Now Finke is slated as a backup for the crewed flight test. Finke, Williams, and Wilmore were actually kind of training all as a cadre since the initial operational flight test launch attempt was delayed all the way back and then eventually was postponed. So there was a lot of astronaut reshuffling. It's very interesting that like how much of it has to change and how much of it is delayed. One of the delays wasn't because of anything Boeing did. It was because the ISS had too many vehicles. And so there was no space for the thing to dock with. And so it got pushed back. And then they discovered a new problem. And then in June of this year, it got delayed indefinitely because there was a problem with the parachute lines. They didn't use the wrapping that goes around the cords of the parachute lines, and other wiring wasn't resistant to flame, which is bad because when you come through the atmosphere, you start to light yourself on fire for a minute there. So now we have a date. Joshua will Capcom, as far as we know currently, hopefully in April 2024, and then we'll hopefully fly in 2025 with some NASA astronauts as well. So hopefully that does go through.
Okay. And so to kind of recap sort of the timeline for all of these missions, we're looking at late 2024 for Artemis 2.
Yes, November 2024 for Artemis 2.
Okay, and then the following year, we would see the next Canadian go up as well.
Hopefully early 2025.
Okay, so we might have, a couple astronauts in the next couple of years. You had mentioned that this was going to be the fourth Canadian astronaut for a long duration mission. I'm going to try to do this by memory here. So we had, of course, David St. Jacques, Chris Hadfield, and Julie Payette.
No, I don't think it was Robert Thirsk, I think.
Oh,
Bob Thirsk.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bob Thirsk. All right.
Yep.
Okay. So there you go. That's a great trivia question for you all out there. All the different Canadian I guess the longer missions. There have been other Canadians that have gone into space as well. I like Julie Payette for shorter missions, I assume.
I think she had a shorter mission. So long duration missions are like missions that are usually they're over 6 months long. So Robert Thirsk did 188 days. Chris Hadfield did 144. And then David St. Jacques did 204 and was the longest one. But I think, I don't think Julie Payette ever took place in a long duration mission.
Okay. Well, there you go, folks. Big updates for our Canadian astronaut friends that are going to be going up in the next few years. We've got a last few minutes here. If you have any questions about anything that Marley has talked about, or if you have any questions, like I said, in the universe, now is your time to ask. But we are going to have a very special guest for our next Ask an Astronomer, which is going to be on December 14th. Brianna Crumpets, who just completed their master's at the University of Victoria, they are going to come in and talk about artificial intelligence as it relates to the types of work that she does there, studying the universe. So if you want to learn about some of those models that she has been working on, join us for our last Ask an Astronomer of the year on December the 14th. And then we will be back again, of course, in the new year with a new schedule. And don't forget that we're going to be celebrating perihelion, a fun Astronomer's New Year. We preview all of the big stories that I'm assuming is going to include that Artemis 2 launch in November, but many other stories we're going to be previewing for our special perihelion event on January 2nd. That's the Astronomer's New Year. So please join us for that. You can go to our website, spacecenter.ca, for all of the details. And that about wraps it up for this episode of Ask an Astronomer. Marley, thank you for your presentation. And for all of you watching out there, go look at the clear night sky and the bright moon out there.
Yeah, if there's no clouds, go for it.